Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. So excited to get into this panel to hear from our terrific panelists. Before I do that, let me just give a little bit of background. I know we've all been hearing these staggering figures about the business case for women, but that's really what we're going to, business case for focusing on women, but that's really what we're going to focus on. So let me just reiterate a couple of the numbers that we've heard. So we're talking about the business case for serving women better with financial services. And I have an illustrious panel of fintechs here, so we're going to really focus in on that. But I think the business case is clear. There's 700 billion revenue opportunity for serving women better as customers, as we heard before, with women expected to control 72 trillion in wealth globally. We also heard from the new research that there's 260 trillion dollars in under control of the female economy and a 24 trillion dollar spend. Beyond that, women make up about 47% of the world's labor force, with nearly 40% of entrepreneurs around the world being women. Now, despite these facts, and we got into this a little bit with the presentation right before the last one, only 65% of women are financially included compared to 72% of men. And when included, we also heard about the high rates and levels of dissatisfaction. 74% of women reported being dissatisfied with their bank, with their, and 70% with their. Yeah. So, this question of are fintechs myopic about really addressing the opportunity of the women's market? We heard that there's lack of disaggregation. There's lack of disaggregation, sorry, of the total available market by sex. And conducting research into women's economy, also when building the business case, doesn't seem like it's happening as much as it could. Now, because fintechs are revolutionizing financial services using innovative technology, they seem to have a clear edge to dominate the women's market, which, as we're hearing, is still pretty underserved. And I would also say that fintechs have an opportunity to differentiate themselves by taking a strategic growth approach to creating these solutions, and also purposely and intentionally driving financial inclusion for women, really spotlighting that. So, with this backdrop in mind and reminding everyone of these numbers, I think we're going to engage in what's going to be an exciting conversation with some of the fintechs on our panel. So, there's three things that I and the panelists hope you come away with today. The first is a strong understanding of the different opportunities of the women's market and from a fintech angle. The second is a clear sense of the size and scope of the opportunity. And finally, and I think probably most interestingly, gleaning some lessons from the fintechs on our panel about best practices and how they're really capturing this opportunity. So without further ado, let's jump in. Let me just reintroduce our panelists a little bit. We have a fantastic panel, so knowing their background and their expertise, I think will facilitate the conversation. So we have Virginia Tan with us, who is a founding partner of Kasia Ventures. It's the first gender lens VC fund for emerging Asia. Virginia also founded She Loves Tech, the world's largest startup competition for women in technology. And Virginia is also the founder and former president of Lean In China, one of China's leading nonprofit platform for women with over 100,000 members. We also have with us Sairi Chahal, the founder and CEO of Shiro. It's a community platform for women offering support, resources, opportunities, and interactions via Shiro.com with the Shiro app. Now, the Shiro network has a global footprint of 21 million women. We're also joined by Tan Binru, sorry if I'm saying that correctly, who is the CEO of One Connect Financial Technologies, a leading technology as a service platform for financial institutions. One Connect is an associate company of the Ping An Group, which ranked 21st on the 2020 Fortune Global 500. In her role, Binru is responsible for expanding One Connect's fintech solutions outside of China. And last but not least, we have Arban Bhattacharya, who's head of financial services for Zalingo. And at Zalingo, Arnab aims to leverage the company's position to build a world-class fintech offering, supporting the company's commitment to streamline and digitize the supply chain. And today, the company employs over 500 staff representing more than 20 different nationalities. So with that, I'd like to welcome the panel and dive in. So this session is going to happen in a couple sections. We're going to hear from the panelists. There's some questions I'd love to ask them. And then we're going to open the floor up for questions from the audience. So if I could go to Virginia first. Virginia, you run one of the few gender lens focused funds. So I'm curious to know, why do you think female consumers are underserved? And why do women represent a massive arbitrage opportunity for this market?
Salah, I'm delighted to be here. So why do I think women consumers are underserved? I mean, it's not just, I think, in the area of fintech. I think women consumers feel massively underserved. If you look at, just the numbers, right? So women control 80% of global discretionary spending, but actually are really only allocated 2% of venture capital money. And so that means that the majority of products and services that we actually consume, as a female consumer, not necessarily designed by the, by people who are really, necessarily understand our needs. I mean, like I said, we can just take one vertical, for example. If we think of health, healthcare, in general as a vertical, I gave an interview to the Financial Alliance for Women, recently, and I said that most drugs, I don't know if people realize, over the decades, were only tested on men's bodies, and actually male and female bodies, for example, react differently and to drugs. And so, just thinking of the drugs that we take as an everyday kind of thing, knowing that they were never tested on or necessarily made for our bodies. That's just one example. I mean, if you look at, femtech, which is, essentially a very rising vertical. I mean, why are there still lack of solutions for things like menopause, or for example, like fertility, which isn't crazily expensive. So that's just one small example. There've been unicorn companies built essentially really leveraging on these gaps. For example, companies like Jessica Alba's Honest Company, which was really leveraging the gap, by FMCG companies in producing environmentally friendly, goods for households, as an example. And so why do I think, women are really the massive arbitrage opportunity in the market? I think, for the longest time, I think a lot of the discourse has been on women as, social beneficiaries, okay, unbanked, underserved, but what the data actually is really telling me, especially in a digital age, is actually that women are as much economic drivers as well as beneficiaries of new, business models in the internet economy. And why is that, essentially, a massive, arbitrage opportunity? So, as a venture capitalist, I look at things like, what gives a company a strategic advantage over another? Is it because from a product perspective, they understand their customers better, so they have a superior product? And also when you look at actually the distribution, we look at women not just as consumers but as online traffic. For example, women are more likely than men to actually buy online. They're more likely to buy through their communities. They're more likely to buy socially than actually through any paid placement. But what that actually, in a sense, translates for a venture capitalist is that, because of that virality, that cost of acquisition, per customer, and the long-term retention because of the trust built in that community, could actually, would actually be better. And that's one of the reasons, for example, Teja invested in Shiros, and we have Sairi here today as an example. And then third, in terms of an economic opportunity, we see women as also a mobile workforce. And what does that actually mean? When you look at, the future of commerce and retail, e-commerce 2.0, 3.0, it's no longer people just going to a marketplace and just buying stuff. People are buying from each other, and women are much more likely than men to transact in that way. And we have another great company on, on this panel, Zalingo, whereby, women essentially, form a huge part of the reseller network. We're seeing that from companies like, Pinduoduo, which is the Chinese super unicorn, and commerce, social commerce companies like Nisho in India, so to speak. So that's why I see women as, the largest arbitrage opportunity of my generation. And, and I think that has been accelerated by technology. Technology is enabling, us to scale those behaviors, as well as allowing women to monetize those behaviors. And that's why, that to me is an extremely powerful thing that the data is showing us.
That makes complete sense. And let me just turn to Cyree and pick up on some of the things you said. Virginia kind of teed us up with thinking about women as economic drivers, as more apt to buy online, even being viral, the word you use for VCs, in the different types of ways that they're buying from each other, and kind of really the engines of commerce. So let me ask you, you've created one of the most successful women community platforms in India with over 60 million women. We're hearing a little bit about it, but I'm just wondering from your perspective, can you tell us a little bit more about why you decided to create a platform only focused on women? And can you also touch on how you're kind of capturing this opportunity when you think about your customer value proposition?
Thank you for that. And so, look, our proposition is really really simple. And to begin with, we are now 21 million women, and I think this is the COVID effect that digital is driving a lot of adoption. And so, India has two things. India has one of the largest number of people online in the world. We are almost now close to a billion people online, uh, and one of the biggest gender gaps in the world. So when you put both these in context, some very stark things show up. When I started first thinking about Heroes, India had only 10 million women online, and that number is almost 350 million women who are online today, connected to the internet for the first time. And guess what? Internet is a big enabler for safety, for trust, for social mobility, for mobility in every which way. And what we uh, think about when we think about heroes is that their experience of the internet is safe, it's high trust, but it's also a space to express themselves freely. It's a space to co-create value. And the other thing that's sort of driving a lot of what we are doing today is the rise of micro entrepreneurship. So we know that global job creation has been slow, but micro entrepreneurship, remote work, gig work, these are trends that are growing. So Shiro's is really one a safe space for all these women who are first time internet users to find a place to hang out without fear of being judged, trolled, or abused at any point, but more so find things that are very, very valuable in the process. So we have four pillars on which we've designed the entire platform. We call them identity. Imagine getting your first Gmail ID or your first LinkedIn account. So here is a set of users who are getting their first online identities, and the only other app they have used is WhatsApp. Finding a network, a peer network, which kind of is very similar to who you are. We all use platforms like LinkedIn, but we obviously are in a very different context. And then there's a lot of support around, well-being, health. Women's health is a big case. Mental health is a big case. Career advice, parenting advice, and then fourth and the most important pillar is access to money, which is why entrepreneurship, employment, and now access to credit or capital, as we may call it. So in some ways, this is almost like internet membership for women when they come to Shiros. And look, we're just about 3 years into this platform, and it's almost 21 million women. We see that this has the potential to reach 100 million women and maybe more. But what it's also doing is it's creating these catalytic effects, for 500,000 women to become entrepreneurs, for 100,000 women to become remote workers, for 2 million women to access mental health on their smartphone. So it's massive in terms of what it can create, both in terms of economic value and the social impact that it can generate. So we are very excited by that, and of course, there's a lot of headroom to grow in terms of where this opportunity can go. And clearly, even at our own level, we know that micro financial products are our next go. And we're kind of excited by that.
And trust and getting into microfinance. So, how can you speak a little bit more about how you'll integrate financial services into this platform that you've built?
For us, so as a company, our model is very simple. So we're not building a traditional social network. We are building a community, which means our members benefit from every interaction that they have with the platform. And what we are doing now is, look, our users have very deep relationships with us. So they have their online identity with us. They run their own communities here. They're setting up their own groups, yeah, online. They're bringing their friends online. They're creating content which is on the platform. But more so, they're also uh, finding work through us. They're finding entrepreneurship through us. They're setting up their first shops. So there's a lot we know about them, and the relationship we have with them is deep and trusted. So we are building something called the Shiro score, which is basically a map of the relationship our user has with us, and we are using that relationship to qualify and underwrite risk. And interestingly, in India, this model has succeeded at a really massive scale. The all of microfinance success in India in the offline world is actually women borrowers, and they have super low NPAs, and they've been very, very successful. And a lot of listed companies have come out of that whole trend. But all of that was in the offline world. So what we're really doing is we are studying our users. We are strengthening our relationship with them, and we are taking that relationship and converting it into a relationship of trust, and we're using that trust to build financial products women can use. These are savings products and microloan products and so on. And what it's in fact doing is it's increasing the size of cohorts, entrepreneurship cohorts and remote work cohorts, and of course, bringing more women to the network. So it's a community that grows itself as it grows, as the members benefit from it, because that's the original network effect, and that's the genuine reason to come here. And of course, I think I can't emphasize this enough, that women only safe spaces make for very nurturing environments. And in India, we've seen that success happen in the offline world amazingly many times over in the last 30-40 years.
Let me turn now to Tan, going to One Connect. You work with some of the biggest financial institutions across Asia. So I'm wondering if you can tell us how you're working with these financial institutions to capture the women's market opportunity. And specifically, are there differences across different fintech verticals? And what has made you most successful?
Thanks. Yeah, and I think consistent with the other panelists, right? In One Connect, we work with many financial institutions, and maybe on sad to say, most of the products are not specific to women. A lot of times, in the unbanked population, you want to capture as much market share as possible. So the chances of targeting only women from a product level is actually on the low side. Currently, with a lot of financial institutions, we do see some trends and some product experience that is tailored towards making the women more comfortable with the product. And I think that's more or less down the right track, taking a baby step to creating a product that's specifically for women. Like, for example, we see that some of the self-help functionalities are more accepted by women because they may not want to speak to a person face to face compared to a man. So you'll realize that digital onboarding capabilities, as well as remote interview capabilities, those are pretty well accepted by the women. Contrary to the men, we created an offline function that maybe a relationship manager can speak to you, and that's used more by the men than the women. In Ping An Good Doctor, we also realized that the women needs a differentiated experience as well as maybe a different offering of service on the platform. So Ping An Good Doctor provides virtual consultations for all Ping An insurance customers. And initially, when we first started the platform, and it wasn't planned, but most of the initial users are all women. And after we realized that most of the users are women, with analysis, we realized that because women have a tendency not to travel out of the house, and usually they have small children, infants at home, and they want a quick online virtual consultation just to be sure that the child is doing fine, I'm not overreacting, etc. So then a suite of products is then created on Ping An Good Doctor for women. We partner with Wife Nutrition, And Wife Nutrition has maternity and infant benefits for 12 million women. And so we partner them to offer pediatrician consultation, virtual consultations on Ping An Good Doctors platform. Currently, the platform already has 300 million active users, so it's a very successful platform, and I think women plays a very big part in the usage of the platform. So that's one example. I think other than that, the high level trends we see are consistent with what the other panelists are saying, that they have less default rate, they're more thoughtful towards debt, right? So I think from a risk modeling perspective, we want to make sure that this gender information are then taken into consideration when it comes to credit scoring. When it's targeting the unbanked, that at the scoring level is taken into consideration.
I want to bring in Arnab and pick up something that you said, the word you used, scale. And I think that's kind of what we're all focusing on when we think about the impact that can be had. We have these large numbers in terms of opportunity size. How do you turn them into scale? So if I can ask you on the Zalingo platform, how do you think you've helped contribute, or how are you contributing to the successful scaling of the women businesses you're seeing there?
Thanks. I just want to pick up from something that Virginia mentioned, which is all about technology and data, right? So we've got a B2C platform which enables women to sell, and we've also built out the B2B platform which enables businesses to source. So this is, I think, working very well for women entrepreneurs who historically and based, and some of the comments that Saudi also made, have may not have access to some of these tools to enable to operate out of the domain that they work in, and be able to access customers or even sourcing opportunities around the same. The other element that came through that, which is talked about, which is access to capital. So what we've done over the last sort of 2 to 3 years, we've been building out this whole aspect about, let's make your operating data your collateral so that you can enable that to use financing. One of the biggest challenges that comes across is that when you have an opportunity of a market that you want to get into, you've got a great product, you figured out how to source for that product as well, but the whole impact of working capital comes in, especially when you're looking at the business to business cycle. So how do you bridge that gap? And often collateral, we go to traditional financial institutions, collateral is a huge challenge. So we are taking a pretty simplified approach, which is complex to implement, but simplified in the approach is that you come onto the Zalingo platform, and whether you're buying or selling, the whole idea is to convert your data into collateral, which you can then leverage to access financing, because that enables you to build up your score, something that Shari touched on, something that Tan touched on, which then enables you to break through the traditional models of financing which have always been in place, and especially impacts micro entrepreneurs. So just provide some data points around it, right? So we operate in Southeast Asia, and it's in a and women in the workforce, it's probably about 31% overall, but in the fashion textile industry, it's about 68%. So you've got a situation that this is an industry which employs a huge amount of women who themselves want to be micro entrepreneurs in different parts of Asia markets that we operate in, whether it's Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, India. But usually, what they are sort of you know the challenges that they face are fundamentally comes down to either training or access to capital, and we are taking these baby steps. So we've launched this program, and which you're going to be executing and scaling up across Indonesia and Thailand, called She Works, where the whole objective is to enable women to get one access to um, training and education in terms of how to use financial products and embed it into their businesses that they want to build. Number two, connect them to financial institutions who want to go ahead and support it, and especially the growing number of fintechs and the whole aspect of inclusion that we want to drive. And then lastly, enable them to actually realize this uh, their sales through embedding payment gateways, which once they have sold enables to collect efficiently, and therefore helping them in the working capital space. So I think that's the whole objective that we have, using data and technology, embedding into our platform, provide training so that you can use and select the financial instruments that are appropriate for the business that you're running. Because often one of the challenges that comes in is that there's a bit of product push that takes place. So often you don't necessarily are able to use the right product. So getting the data, enable micro segmentation, either mapping or creating products which are appropriate for the business cycle, for the micro entrepreneurs, especially the women who are budding micro entrepreneurs and want to get onto the platform, is sort of very critical for our growth.
Thank you for that. And I want to turn now to some of the research that we heard about a little bit earlier. And maybe if I can just stay with you, Arnab, some of the research showed that, there's certain reasons why, or certain ways, I should say, to have fintechs, investors, and others in the ecosystem address what we're calling the women's market or the female economy. And there's certain reasons that come up. One of them, or certain ways that this could happen. So we heard about market research and data showing a business case for women being a need, or research showing that women are underserved, and have different requirements. And also, we touched a little bit, it was highlighted on partnerships with corporations like banks that focus on the women's market, and leveraging that support from banks. So, in your opinion, what do you think will really drive this focus on the female economy? Are those the tools that fintechs mentioned that will really do it, or are we missing something, or would you agree with those?
That you have is around how the overall cost of acquisition for women businesses versus the long-term value creation. There are anecdotal evidence. I've personally seen it in some of our clients and customers, where the intent to repay is much larger, the stickiness is much larger, the discipline in the way the business is much higher. I might be a bit biased, but I think the data over a period of time, as we differentiate it, will prove all of the hypotheses. And the fact is, you know, there is an existing practice where historically, because of men-led businesses, the gender differentiation hasn't come in. And I think the way you actually use this data and therefore create specific products for women and businesses run by women, I think is a massive opportunity, which I think is still got to be explored in full. But I think platforms such as today is just going to open, I think, a lot more conversations, which will hopefully lead to a lot more traction in creating this extremely untapped, very large untapped opportunity that exists today.
Yeah, and that was from the fintech side. So reporting that they thought what would open this space up was market research, showing the business case, as we said, showing that there's different requirements and partnerships. From the investor side, the most important levers that they mentioned were looking at women having a higher than average LTV than men, and also market research, but showing the business case from the investor side. Let me go to Tan and see what your opinion is on either of these categories, either what the research is telling us that fintechs are saying, or investors, or quite frankly, any other player in the ecosystem. What can finally unlock this opportunity now that we have some of the numbers and we're all in violent agreement about the business case? Where do we go from here?
I think that a lot has been done with regards to understanding that women has a lower default rate and working towards collective.
I think we're having a little trouble hearing you. Maybe I think there will work on your mic. Maybe we can ask the same of Sairi.
Uh, uh, Look, there are. Let me take an example from India. So when India last 10 years saw this major e-commerce and digital payments penetration, and I think we all feel that the market is still it's still underdeveloped. It's still could build more depth. And guess what? When we look at the data that has come last 10 years, we realize that majority of the users or majority of the customers are still men. And I think uh, until such time that women join this market, both as consumers as well as producers, it will continue to be a small market. So I think it's pertinent to look at that from expanding the size of pie. And of course, I think from a women's perspective, we know at Shiro's, uh, women are lifelong customers. Their retention on the platform. In fact, that's how we look at that relationship. That once you're in the network, this is really your network, and you can do a lot within it. And and that's how we look at our product roadmap. It's not a few quarters. It's actually a few years. And overall, just because there's also a lot of word of mouth, it's hard to capture, but the truth is, when women are your customers, there's a lot of word of mouth, and there's a lot of positive reinforcement of the message that you want out. And I think net, this is a very profitable segment to focus on, and just highly capital efficient, highly capital efficient. And there's enough data that points in that direction, that building for women has just long term value, across the chain. And I think the other part of this is social. Look, there is a real need. You're not creating a new need. The need is deep, and it's expansive. It is it's something users value. And if you serve markets where users value what you're offering them, it changes their life. It changes the course of their aspiration. It helps them move up in the social mobility path. It just makes them extremely loyal to what you've built for them. And of course, there is a progression of the user. So users not forever staying at the same level. They consume more, they give back more. They definitely have deeper relationships over a period of time. And this playbook actually exists in India. This playbook is actually not new, except that this playbook has been all offline. And yeah, this is a good time to sort of scale it online, increase the size of the pie, to increase transacting users in a digital economy. You need women to be part of it, 100%.
Thank you for that. Let me see if Binru, do we have you back? I love your perspective on this question.
Yeah. So can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, all right. So I guess we have beaten the topic of the LTV to death, so I wouldn't touch on it. As a fintech, I think most importantly is that ourselves have diversity in our hiring, because you realize that while tech people is very scarce in Singapore, uh, female tech developers are really scarce. And when the development of the product is 100% male developers, is usually not a very balanced work of from a product perspective. So in One Connect, we make sure that our percentage of women is higher than 30%. Currently, we are at about 32%. Still low. I hope to hit 45, 50% definitely. And you'll find that women developers are very good in certain areas, like for example, the UI UX customer journey design. And that's very impactful, as if the fintech starts with diversity, then the product that goes to the or the technology that goes to the financial institution is much more balanced in my view. A lot of times also when anything is automated, the whole technology adoption actually displaces some workforce, and most of them are women. So with a lot of our customers that we work with, we also work on helping them to ensure that they can retrain and retain some of these women talents that's already in their workforce. A lot of times technology cannot do a 100% replacement. You will need to do retraining, so that is a combination of both a smarter tech and a human that comes in to do the judgment call.
And let's go back to Virginia. Same question. I'm wondering from a fund perspective, does this research resonate in terms of what we need to unlock people actually taking advantage of this opportunity?
Absolutely. I think as an investor, we're mindful of certain metrics, and like some of them have already been covered by my fellow panelists. They talked about LTV, loyalty. Sairi talked about virality. Word of mouth is actually the cheapest form of acquisition. I know that for example, Shiro's has grown almost organically, which is incredible, as opposed to a crazy burning of capital. I loved what Binru said about product. Whoever's actually building the product needs to be sensitive to actually the consumer needs. And so the one thing I would say, apart from looking at cost of acquisition, LTV, and actually, the strategic advantage of the product, right? Do they know the customer better? I would really look at TAM. And then this is actually where I want to talk about the women's market. I think, when you think of women consumers, I think, women actually, there are multiple markets in one. They are, if I were to have to actually make the case for financial institutions and fintech for women, it would be actually women are conduits, to new markets. So they buy on themselves, for themselves and for their households. They're very likely to be, the data shows us, first adopters of new consumption patterns. And just tapping on the loyalty and the LTV thing, it's not just they buy, let's say for example, health and wellness stuff for themselves, or they're really really conduits to their households and their communities. So for example, if you want to talk purely about fintech, in most of Asian countries, it is actually the women, in the in the family, who is actually responsible for making, for example, for buying financial products, insurances, savings, etc. For her family. So I think something that I'm really trying to focus on is actually what we think of as the TAM. I think a lot of people, the elephant in the room essentially is that when people think of the women's market, they're always like, Virginia, why are you choosing to focus on 50% of the market? I think the elephant in the room with investors is always that they think that women are a limitation, not an opportunity. And I always tell them, hey, we're not looking at 50% of the market. We're really looking at 80% of the market. We're looking at how women can be conduits, to new markets, how they are market makers. And this plays to your TAM, to your LTV, this plays to your CAC, etc. But the question really is, if you can serve them better than others, that becomes a strategic advantage for your company. And as an investor, and as an investor, if I can spot that kind of company, I should be investing in it. So that's the investment case I've made for the she economy.
And thank you, Virginia. You really brought it home to us. We're unfortunately out of time. We could stay on this topic for a long, long time, but we've come to the close of the session. And I just wanted to reiterate some of the themes that we heard in this session. I mean, to really to put a finer point on what we've been talking about this whole summit, I'm really focusing on LTV and TAM. The fact that women are multiple markets in one. I love this word virality in terms of, like Virginia said, not 50% of the market, but maybe 80, and that multiplier effect. And really thinking about women as the first adopters of buying in different ways, whether it's online or community or mutual exchange. So let me leave it there. And thank you so much to our panelists. This has been a great conversation, and I know the conversation will continue.